My name is Ellie Cowan. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at Preservation Maryland, obviously not the Director of Webinars. So I do apologize about that. I'm joined today by Kimberly Goldenbrandt, our Director of Smart Growth Maryland, and she's going to be helping me go over some of our preservation priorities for the 2019 session. So since we're already a little bit behind, let's get going. For a quick big picture review of 2018, we were able to pass legislation that made improvements to the state historic tax credit program. There was an additional 5% credit for projects that result in affordable housing. It's similar to the additional 5% for LEED energy efficient buildings that was already part of the tax credit, historic tax credit, so a large commercial program. So we were really happy to add this additional incentive for affordable housing projects to be done within historic structures. We were also able to get rid of a restriction and allow for the use of the historic tax credit on functionally related buildings, making campus-wide projects such as Prince George's County's Glendale Hospital easier to tackle. And an amendment that came in during session last year that was passed in the final legislation was that now any unclaimed credits in the large competitive commercial program will now return back into the program instead of reverting to the general fund. So if a project were to receive credits but didn't move forward, those unclaimed credits would then be available the next round. We were also really pleased last year that the governor's budget included $900,000 for Maryland Historical Trust Preservation Grant Program. The Capital Grant Program, which provides for bricks and mortar projects, received $600,000, and the non-capital or survey and research grant program received $300,000. And we were really pleased about that because they had gone unfunded for an extremely long period of time. We were also able to block potentially harmful historic district flood bill. And what this bill said was that any local legislative body would have been able to deviate from historic district guidelines if there were non-tidal floods within the historic district that threatened life or safety or resulted in death. And the wording on this bill was extremely vague, and we were able to get it turned into a study bill, but it never moved out of committee. And we were really happy that we were able to put a check on this bill because, not a little over a month after session ended last year, historic Ellicott City was flooded again. And as many of you who are listening know, the Howard County Council and tried to move forward with demolition within the Ellicott City Historic District, and had this bill become law, it would have made made that a lot easier for them to do. So sometimes passing legislation or blocking legislation are just as important. Many other things, good things happened. There was a joint chairman's report on preservation MHT easements. And so what this did was had the Maryland Historical Trust review the history, administration, and future of their historic easement program. We saw the first major burial site protection legislation since the 1990s, which added certain protections for burial sites and authorized municipalities to establish local tax credits for property owners to maintain and repair burial sites on their property. There was also funding that went to the Maryland Historical Society to establish a museum grant fund. At one point, the Maryland Historical Trust administered a museum grant fund that had gone unfunded since 2010. So we were really happy to see this funding go into the establishment of a new museum grant fund, which will provide funding for small museums across the state beginning in fiscal year 2020. There was also full funding for the Maryland Heritage Area Authority at $6 million. There was full funding for the Maryland Historical Trust's African American Heritage Grant Program, as well as full funding for program Open Space. So moving on to the upcoming session, the current session rather, the 2019 Preservation Legislative Priorities. We have a bill going in for policy improvements for the state historic tax credit, and within that same bill, we'll be asking for increased funding for the large commercial program. We'll go over all of these priorities in more detail. We'll also be focusing on preservation grant funding, so the capital, African American Heritage, and non-capital grant programs administered by the Maryland Historical Trust. There is also a bill involving the Smart Growth Investment Fund, which Kim will talk about a little bit later. We are continuing to fight to protect the program Open Space funding, and within program Open Space, we will be asking to maintain full funding for the Maryland heritage areas. So diving right into our historic tax credit legislation. We sort of look at this in two parts. There's the policy side of it and then the funding side of it. So we'll start with the policy. And this bill is being introduced on the Senate side by Senator Bill Ferguson, and on the House side by Delegate Brooke Learman, both of Baltimore City's District 46, and they are big supporters of historic preservation, and we are so happy to work with them on this legislation. And so what we'll be focusing on is really trying to incentivize the private investment in these preservation projects. That's what this tax credit is. It's an incentive for reinvestment in neighborhoods and historic communities. One of the things that we will be focusing on is making the tax credit transferable. So this is the large commercial tax credit. We had this in our bill last year. It was taken out in an amendment, but we are going to try to get this through this year. And what this does is it provides an additional, it allows the tax credit, the developers to transfer the credits to a third party, which provides an additional viable tax credit financing option for rehabilitation developers to take on these difficult revitalization projects where the profit margins are extremely small. I think everybody in historic preservation understands that these projects do cost more than new builds. So the point of these tax credits is to incentivize the investment in the project and make them appealing. So making the credits transferable is one step towards making it easier for developers to take on these projects. We will also be seeking an additional 5% credit for projects that are undertaken in opportunity zones. So this will be modeled after how we added that additional 5% for affordable housing projects. So if a developer applies for a credit and their project is within one of the opportunity zones within Maryland, they will be eligible for an additional 5%, totaling 25% of their QRE, qualified rehabilitation expenditures. We will be modifying the small commercial program to encourage the multiple row house projects. So what this would encourage developers to take on blocks of row houses, multiple row houses, rehabilitate them, and then sell them to as single-family residences. As it stands now, the small commercial program can only be used if it can't be solely residential. We would remove that language and allow for the use for not only commercial income producing purposes, but also for projects that subsequently are sold for use as owner-occupied residence. And then we also, within the small commercial program, would like to establish 2 pilot programs, resource-specific pilot programs. One for agricultural structures, so structures that have either been used or are currently being used for agricultural purposes in rural areas, and as well as post-World War II structures, so structures built in the post-World War II eras, roughly from 1945 to 1969. And what we see this as doing is really showing that this program can be used outside of urban centers, in rural areas, and in sort of the suburbs where you see a lot of that post-World War II construction happening. And every year more things become eligible to be historic. So we thought that focusing on post-World War II structures would help draw attention to preserving those more recent past structures. Right now, the small commercial program had a one-time funding of $4 million. About $2 million of that funding is left. So our bill will include an additional $2 million to go back into that small commercial program to, again, continue to encourage these Main Street, smaller commercial projects within historic communities. We also included increased cap for non-commercial projects, so residential projects. Since 2004, the cap on that has been $50,000. We'd like to see that moved up to $75,000 just to reflect inflation and the fact that your dollars in 2004 spend a lot different in 2019. This bill would also extend the reauthorization of the tax credit. Right now, it is reauthorized through 2022. We would like to see that reauthorization extended through 2024. And now we've gotten to none of this would be possible. None of these changes will have any impact unless there is more funding to the large commercial tax credit. And I hope that many of you have read the letter to the editor that our executive director, Nick Redding, wrote about this program and how important it is as a community revitalization tool, but that it can't be effective without more funding. So right now, the governor released his budget last week, and there is still only $9 million allocated for this competitive commercial program, and that's for across the state, $9 million. For a little bit of context, we have our neighbors, Virginia, investing about $100 million in their historic tax credit, and West Virginia is investing about $30 million in theirs. Just for a little comparison there. So in the bill that we will be putting forward, we will require that this program be funded at $20 million. We've seen in looking at the applications that have come in the past that there's usually about a $30 million ask level with only $9 million to go around. We have a feeling that if we are able to get more funding into this program, more projects will come forward. There are shovel-ready projects that need this funding to move forward, and when they don't get it, those projects don't happen. So we're going to need a lot of help advocating for these changes, but we know how catalytic these projects can be, and we believe that the investment in the return on investment for this $20 million, it's an $11 million increase, would be exponential. Moving on from the historic tax credit into our preservation grant programs, these are budgeted, so within the governor's budget, which again, as I said, was released last week, and we need to work with the legislature and administration in order to increase funding or maintain funding for these. So within the fiscal year 20 budget, we see that the capital grant program is maintained at the $600,000 level. The African American Heritage Grant Program is at $1 million. Unfortunately, the non-capital grant program has gone unfunded. And we were really disappointed to see that, because this is some of the only funding out there for projects that tell the stories of underrepresented communities, such as the story of Maryland's history in the women's suffrage movement, which will be celebrating its centennial next year, and the LGBTQ sites, and other stories that remain to be told. These are also survey grants as well, so it's really the first step in any historic preservation. Structures need to be surveyed, and in order to be included on the National Register, or to create new historic districts to protect more recent historic areas. So we will be needing your help. We will be needing you to add your voice to really work hard to get the funding back. We'll be asking for $400,000 for that non-capital grant program moving forward. And I will now hand this over to Kim, who will talk to you about some of our smart growth initiatives this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So the first thing I'm going to talk with you about is the Smart Growth Investment Fund. So this is legislation that will require the governor to make a one-time allocation of $7 million in the fiscal year 2021 budget bill for the fund. The bill also charges the Maryland Department of Commerce with selecting a private management entity to operate and to grow the fund. So the expectation is that the public funds would be used to leverage private capital for the investment fund. We know that smart growth projects like infill and redevelopment projects are more challenging for developers than greenfield development. So this is one more tool in Maryland's smart growth toolbox to try and make it easier for developers to do the right thing. So this bill was pre-filed, so it was filed before the session started. So we've already had a first reading in the Senate, and we have our hearing scheduled. So that is February 5th at 1 before the Senate Finance Committee. Our bill sponsor in the House is Delegate Lafferty, and we do not yet have a hearing date. That bill will be heard by the Environment and Transportation Committee. So for program open space, this is a number of programs that provide funding for preserving farms and forests, for creating parks and playgrounds, and for residents of Baltimore City for maintaining our parks. And unfortunately, since the inception of the program in 1969, over $1 billion has been diverted to other programs. So there is a schedule for repayment of funding, and every year we advocate for full funding for these programs and also full payback. And we are pleased to report that the governor's budget shows full funding and shows full payback. So at this point, we just need to make sure that the legislature doesn't change any of the allocations. So we'll be watching that. And then for the heritage areas, there's also full funding. This is one of those program open space programs. And what the budget is showing, just like last year, is maintaining full funding at $6 million. And this is incredibly important because there are few funding sources available to support the areas that tell the story of our heritage. So without this funding, there's really not a whole lot else out there to draw upon.
Great. So those are our priorities this year. They are by no means the end of what we are working on. And so we really do need you to help get involved via contacting your legislators, via phone, email, writing them a letter, going to meet them, perhaps meeting with them on Maryland History Advocacy Day next Thursday, January 31st, where Preservation Maryland, AIA Maryland, and the Maryland Historical Trust are convening history, preservation, and smart growth advocates from across the state to come to Annapolis, meet with their legislators, educate them on what makes history, preservation, conservation so important to keeping what makes Maryland so unique and wonderful around. And so we hope to see all of you there. We will be sharing more information throughout session. We will have ways for you to contact your legislators on specific priority legislation issues. We encourage you to share that information with your friends and followers. We also, all of this work we undertake on our own, and so any contributions to our advocacy fund support our efforts in Annapolis. But we also are interested in hearing from you and what you are working on. Like I said, those the priorities that we listed are overarching priorities for the session, but they are not the end of what we're working on. So if you have any bills or issues that you would like us to know about, please let us know. At presmd.org/advocacy, I will be keeping a running list of bills that focus on heritage, preservation, smart growth, conservation. So if you have a bill that you would like to be added to that, please let me know. And if you have any questions, input, anything like that, you can always email me at ecowan@presmd.org. We have been recording this webinar, so we will get that recording up and out as soon as we can, with the PowerPoint available as well. And if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to either ask them now on the sidebar or just by emailing me at ecowan@presmd.org. And we really look forward to working for you and with you this session. Thanks for tuning in, and I don't see any. Oh, wait, that one. Let's see. So the preservation, I have a question from Heidi who asked who administers the preservation grants. And those are administered by the Maryland Historical Trust. So they administer the capital, the non-capital grant, and the African American Heritage grants. Now, the Maryland Heritage Area Authority also has grants, has a grant program, and they administer those specific ones, but you can only apply for those if your project is within one of the certified heritage areas throughout Maryland. And if there aren't any other questions, then I guess we will sign off. Oh, John Lee Petrol. So for Advocacy Day, we have a question. Will you set up meetings for us? Yes. If you would like us to set up meetings for you, either on Advocacy Day or on another day, you're welcome to email me and let me know. And I'm happy to set something, try and set something up for you. If you would like, aren't feeling confident in meeting with a legislator on your own, we're always happy to accompany you, or just prep you a little bit. And it's you know, you sort of get used to it. After one or two, you'll be an old pro, I promise. And really, you know, telling your own personal story of why these programs are important to you and talking to your legislators really does make a difference. That's what they're looking for. You know, they want to help their constituents. They want to know what their constituents are concerned about. And you know, you telling your personal stories can make a huge difference on whether or not they would whether or not they are supportive of legislation. Great. Another question. Great question, Elizabeth Hughes. There are a number of freshman legislators this year. Do you have any recommendations on how best to bring them up to speed? So we are producing a number of one-pagers, so synopses of our preservation priorities, legislation-specific outlines that walk the legislators through specific programming, and I think focusing on one or two programs and explain what historic preservation is or what smart growth is really the way to go. And sometimes that can't be accomplished in just one meeting, unfortunately, as nice as that would be. But I look at this as an opportunity to introduce new legislators to how important the work that we do is, so that hopefully they don't have any preconceptions of historic preservation or even something like smart growth, and we're able to introduce them and show them that we're not just talking about the past. We're really talking about community revitalization and the future of Maryland neighborhoods and communities. And I'm not sure if that actually answers the question, but getting face to face with the legislators is helpful. And like I said, we will circulate the one-pager information that can be dropped off either at a meeting where you can walk the legislator through the different programs and different asks, or email to them as well. Let's see, any other questions? Okay. I'm going to give it just another minute and see if we have any other questions coming in. Kim, anything else you'd like to add?
No, thanks everyone for joining us.
And again, like I said, I'll email out the recording of this webinar so that you can share it with people who weren't able to make it, or if you want to go back over things. My email is always open for questions, comments, and we'll also be getting those one-pagers out to everybody. And please, if you haven't already, register and come to our Advocacy Day next week. It really is just such a great day to be surrounded by history, preservation, conservation advocates who care just as much about all of these programs as you do and know the importance of the work that we do. It's really great. So we all have our introduction meetings throughout the day. You can come and go as you please. And then at the end of the day, as a capstone, the Maryland Historical Trust at 4:30 will be having their annual Preservation Awards, honoring the best in historic preservation in Maryland from the past year. And that'll then be followed by a reception with food and drinks. And it's a really great way to end a fantastic day of advocacy in Annapolis. So we hope to see you all there. Thanks so much.